He thought she was just a quiet foster kid, until she whispered the words that cracked his entire life wide open. "There's a bug in your car," she said. And what he found changed everything. Adrian Vale had never been the kind of man to notice small things. He noticed numbers, profits, patterns in data that could make or break his biotech empire. But details in everyday life, the soft shifts in people's eyes or the faint blinking of a hidden light, those often passed him by. That was why the tug on his sleeve startled him more than it should have. It was gentle, almost hesitant, the kind of gesture that asked permission more than it demanded attention. He looked down and saw Lila Carter, the little girl who had been living under his roof for just 5 months, her hand clutching the cuff of his tailored jacket. She was 8 years old, but carried herself with the silence of someone much older, someone who had learned to listen before she spoke. Her brown hair, a little too long and in need of brushing, framed her thin face, and her wide eyes held an intensity that always unsettled him. Children were supposed to chatter, laugh, complain, but Lila was different. She observed, waiting, as if the world had already taught her that words were not always welcome. He was unlocking the door of his sleek black Aston Martin, the kind of car that drew eyes wherever it went, when she leaned closer and whispered, almost as if the shadows in the garage might overhear her. "There's a bug in your car." Adrian chuckled, the sound sharp in the stillness. "What do you mean? A spider?" "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." He expected her to smile or roll her eyes, the way children sometimes did when adults misunderstood them. But she didn't. She just kept staring at him with that unwavering look, the one that made him feel strangely exposed. "Not that kind of bug," she said, her voice lower now, more urgent. "A listening bug." The humor drained from his chest as quickly as it had risen. Adrian froze, the key still in the lock. He studied her face, searching for any sign she was playing a game, but there was no mischief in her eyes. There was only certainty and a hint of fear. He followed her small finger as she pointed to the underside of the driver's console, where the faintest red blink pulsed like the heartbeat of something alive. For a moment, his world tilted. He had built his life around security and control. Every deal, every move calculated. Yet here, in the sanctuary of his own garage, a child had pointed out what he, with all his wealth and resources, had missed. Adrian crouched down, his hand brushing the leather seat as he bent closer. The device was small, no bigger than a coin, but its presence felt enormous. His jaw tightened, thoughts racing through possibilities, enemies, rivals, the billions at stake in his latest project. He turned back to Lila, who was still watching him with that unnerving stillness. "How long have you known about this?" he asked. "Since yesterday," she replied simply. "I saw it when the lights were off. It was blinking." Adrian's chest tightened. She had noticed what he had overlooked, and in that moment the balance between them shifted. She was not just a child under his care. She was the reason he might still be safe. Adrian Vale had built his empire the way some men built fortresses, brick by careful brick, each deal another stone placed with precision. At 32, he was already worth more than most people would ever dream of. The founder of a biotech company that promised breakthroughs in medicine and the kind of profits investors fought to get a piece of. He knew how to stand in a boardroom and make seasoned executives listen. He knew how to shake hands with senators and promise them futures he had no intention of sharing. And he knew how to close doors when conversations cut too close to his own secrets. What he did not know, or at least had not yet learned, was how to let someone close without suspecting their motives. Charm came easily to him, like the tailored suits and polished shoes he wore without thinking. But it was a mask more than a truth. Underneath he was guarded, shaped by losses he never spoke about, by the night his parents' car never made it back home, by the years that followed when trust seemed like a luxury he could not afford. Money became his shield, and success became the only way he knew how to fight back against the emptiness. That was the man Lila Carter had come to live with. On paper, she was his ward, a foster child the system had placed in his care after too many homes had turned her away. In practice, she was still something in between guest and stranger. 5 months had passed since she first stepped through the marble entryway of his house. Her small bag clutched to her chest, her eyes darting from chandelier to staircase, as though beauty itself might vanish if she looked too long. Adrian had made sure she had everything: the best schools, a room decorated with soft colors and shelves full of books, new clothes folded neatly in drawers. He had provided comfort as efficiently as he managed a new investment. But providing was not the same as belonging, and he knew she felt the difference every day. He often told himself that time would close the gap, that children were resilient, that one day she would laugh freely in his presence. But even he could see that Lila's silence was not shyness, it was something learned. She watched him in the same way he sometimes watched competitors, cautiously, as though waiting for the truth beneath the smile to reveal itself. When she spoke, it was measured, careful, each word chosen as if she expected it might be used against her. Adrian did not resent it, though at times he found it uncomfortable, because in her silence he saw a reflection of himself. He too had mastered the art of withholding, of calculating before speaking, of trusting only when forced to. Perhaps that was why, despite the awkwardness, he had agreed to take her in. She was a reminder of what he had been once, and maybe of what he could still become if he learned how to be more than just the man who conquered markets. 5 months together had not made them a family, not yet, but in the quiet of his house he had begun to notice the shape of something forming. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was real. And when Lila tugged on his sleeve and whispered about a bug in his car, he realized how easily one small voice could change everything. Adrian slid into the driver's seat of his Aston Martin, the familiar smell of leather wrapping around him like a second skin, but his attention was no longer on the car itself. He followed Lila's small hand as she pointed beneath the driver's console, her fingers steady, her eyes wide but calm. At first he thought maybe she was mistaken. Maybe her imagination had conjured something out of shadows, but then he saw it. A faint red blink, so small it could be mistaken for nothing more than a reflection, pulsed in the dark corner beneath the dash. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he felt as if the entire garage had shrunk around him. He leaned closer, the suit fabric tightening across his shoulders, and studied the object. It wasn't a toy, it wasn't some leftover gadget dropped by a mechanic. It was precise and deliberate. No bigger than a coin, but wired into place with the kind of skill that didn't belong to amateurs. Surveillance, he realized, his stomach tightening. Someone was listening. Someone was watching. Adrian prided himself on control, on knowing every angle of a deal, every risk before he signed his name. But this was something else. This was intrusion in the one place he thought untouchable, the private world of his own life. He straightened, his hands gripping the wheel, and forced his face into stillness, even though his heart was racing. Lila was watching him carefully, waiting for his reaction. For an instant he wanted to dismiss it, to tell her it was nothing, but the certainty in her eyes stopped him. She had lived through too much already, too many homes where her voice had gone unheard, and he wasn't going to be another adult who brushed her aside. "Where did you see it first?" he asked, his voice low, almost hushed. "Last night," she said, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "When the lights were off, I saw it blink. I thought maybe it was part of the car, but then I checked again this morning. It shouldn't be there." Her matter-of-fact tone made something inside him twist. This child, who should have been worried about playgrounds and school projects, was instead scanning her surroundings for hidden dangers. She was sharper than most of the adults he worked with, sharper and more honest, and the truth she had given him now carried more weight than any boardroom presentation. Adrian reached under the console, but pulled his hand back before touching the device. Whoever planted it would know if he disturbed it. He needed proof. He needed to think like he did in business, careful and calculating. But beneath the logic, a cold anger spread. Someone had dared to plant surveillance in his car, and by extension in his life. He looked back at Lila, her small frame dwarfed by the polished lines of the Aston Martin, and for the first time he saw her not as a guest in his home, but as an ally. She had noticed what he had missed. She had risked speaking when silence might have been safer. "Good eye," he said quietly, and meant it. Adrian kept his eyes on the faint red blink beneath the console, but his attention was fixed on the little girl standing beside him. Lila's shoulders were drawn tight, her fingers curled against the seam of her jeans, as if she was preparing herself for disbelief. She had that look again, the one she often wore in the house, the guarded expression of someone who expected her words to slip into silence. He turned his head toward her, waiting, letting the moment stretch so she would know he was listening. "I saw it last night," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "When the lights were off, it blinked. Just once, then again. At first I thought maybe it was normal, something the car does, but it didn't feel right." Her words carried the same careful tone he recognized from boardroom negotiations, the sound of someone testing every syllable before letting it go. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't playing. She was reporting. "I almost didn't say anything," she continued, her eyes flicking toward him and then away. "I didn't want you to think I was being silly. But I kept thinking about it when I tried to sleep. It was still there this morning. That's when I knew I had to tell you." Adrian's throat tightened. The way she said it, as though she had weighed the cost of speaking and nearly chosen silence, struck something in him. He wondered how many times she had stayed quiet in other homes, how many warnings or truths had gone unsaid because no one thought an 8-year-old's voice mattered. "You did the right thing," he said, the words steady but softer than he intended. Her eyes snapped to him at that, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She nodded quickly, as if to absorb the reassurance before it could be taken back. "I listen a lot," she admitted, after a moment, her small hands twisting together. "When you move around the house, when the phones ring, when people come to visit. I don't always understand, but I can tell when something feels wrong. Grown-ups think kids don't notice, but we do." It was no some minute besses. Adrian leaned back in the seat, studying her with new eyes. She had been quiet since the day she arrived. Not withdrawn exactly, but reserved. Always watching from corners, always processing. He had mistaken it for shyness, maybe even fear. But now he saw it for what it was. Observation. Caution. The skills of someone who had learned that survival meant noticing what others ignored. She looked at the blinking light again, her face tightening with something he recognized as both fear and determination. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was scared. What if it was nothing and you got upset? What if you didn't believe me?" "I believe you," Adrian said firmly, without hesitation this time. He meant it in a way he rarely meant anything. The silence stretched, but it wasn't heavy. For the first time since she had come into his life, it felt like they were standing on the same side of something bigger than both of them. And that, he realized, mattered more than any deal he had ever made. Adrian sat in the driver's seat, the hum of the garage light above him sounding louder than it should, his eyes fixed on the faint blinking under the console. His mind was no longer calm. It raced through every possibility, every rival, every competitor who might dare to cross him this way. The drug patent his company was preparing to unveil was worth billions, not just in profits, but in influence. A cure that would place his name in history books. A formula that could change the industry forever. He knew people envied him. He knew people whispered behind his back about the speed of his rise. But planting surveillance in his own car was not envy. It was war. He thought of the endless negotiations he had fought his way through. The deals where men twice his age tried to corner him only to leave the table empty-handed. He had won each battle because he had prepared, because he had never allowed himself to be blindsided. And yet here he was, staring at evidence that someone had already been listening, already gathering what they should never have touched. The polished world he built suddenly felt fragile, like glass balanced on the edge of a table. His first instinct was anger, a hard pulse in his chest that made his hands clench. Who would dare? Apex Pharmaceuticals, the rival firm that had been breathing down his neck for years, seemed the most obvious answer. They had the money, they had the motive, and they had the reputation for cutting corners. But he also thought of people closer, those who had walked his hallways, who had smiled at him, who knew enough about his schedule to plant this without raising suspicion. Betrayal did not always come from strangers. The thought unsettled him in a way business rivals never could. He was used to enemies across the table, not within reach of his home. His gaze shifted from the blinking light to the girl standing beside the car, her small face tilted up toward him, waiting for him to say something. She looked too calm for a child, too steady, and in that steadiness he realized what had just happened. Lila had seen it before he had. Lila had spoken when she could have stayed silent. For 5 months he had thought of her as another responsibility, someone to protect with money and comfort, someone who needed him. But in this moment he saw her differently. She had been the one to protect him, in the simplest and most devastating way. She had looked when he had not. She had trusted her instincts when he had ignored his. The truth of it settled like a weight in his chest. This child, this quiet watcher in his house, might have just saved his empire. Without her voice, the blinking light might have gone unseen until it was too late. His work, his company, his very name could have been destroyed before he even knew he was under attack. He met her eyes then, truly met them, and what he felt was not pity but gratitude. For the first time since she entered his life, Adrian realized that he was not the only one carrying the power to protect. Sophia Kane arrived the way she always did, in a burst of perfume and polished charm, her heels clicking across the marble floor, as if the house itself were a stage built for her performance. She was beautiful in a way that belonged on magazine covers, her dark hair falling perfectly over her shoulders, her lips curved into a smile that seemed designed to disarm every suspicion before it could form. When she leaned in to kiss Adrian's cheek, she did it with the easy confidence of someone who believed she belonged, someone who had never once been told no. Adrian watched her as she slipped her arm through his, her laughter filling the hallway, and for a moment he let himself be soothed by it. Sophia had always known how to make him feel lighter, how to distract him from the constant weight of his business. She was polished, graceful, the kind of woman investors admired at gala dinners and journalists photographed beside him at charity events. She played the role of partner so well that sometimes he forgot it was a role at all. But tonight, with the image of the blinking light still burned into his thoughts, he found himself noticing things he had ignored before. The way she asked about his day but never quite listened to the answers, the way her eyes swept over his office door each time she passed it, the way she lingered in the garage under the excuse of admiring his cars. It was subtle, easy to dismiss as habit, but now he wondered if it had been something else entirely. Sophia touched the key fob of his Aston Martin, her smile widening as she glanced at him. "I was thinking we could take the car out tonight," she said, her voice light, as if it were nothing more than a playful suggestion. "You work so hard, Adrian, but when I'm in that car with you, it feels like I'm part of your world, like I can be close to you in the way that matters." It was the kind of thing she had said before, words that once made him feel understood, but now the timing pressed against his mind, like a warning. He forced a smile, nodding, though his thoughts churned beneath the surface. In the corner of the room, Lila sat on the edge of the couch, with her small hands folded in her lap, her gaze steady. She did not smile when Sophia entered. She never did. Instead, her eyes narrowed, watchful, as if she could see through the flawless hair and carefully chosen words to something colder beneath. Adrian had noticed Lila's quiet disapproval before, but had dismissed it as the natural suspicion of a child who trusted no one easily. Now he wondered if she had been seeing truths he had chosen not to. Lila did not say a word, but her silence spoke louder than Sophia's laughter. Sophia leaned closer to him, her perfume sweet and heavy, her smile dazzling. "You trust me, don't you?" she asked softly. Adrian held her gaze, but in the back of his mind he could feel Lila's watchful eyes, sharp and unwavering, and for the first time, he did not answer immediately. Maria Alvarez had been in Adrian's life longer than most of the people who claimed to know him. At 65, she carried herself with the quiet steadiness of someone who had weathered storms and never once let herself be blown away. She had been hired by his parents when Adrian was just a boy, back when the house still echoed with laughter and long dinners that stretched into the night. After the accident that took them both, she had stayed without hesitation, keeping the home alive in the only way she knew, through care and loyalty. While others drifted in and out of his life, Maria remained invisible to the guests who drank champagne in his dining room, yet always present, always watchful. Adrian trusted her in a way he trusted very few. Not because she asked for trust, but because she had earned it over decades of silence, discretion, and small acts of service that no one ever noticed. She knew which investors lied with their smiles, which girlfriends carried secrets behind their polished faces, and which employees whispered things they should not. She had no interest in wealth or power, but she had an instinct for truth, and Adrian had learned to pay attention when she spoke. That evening he called her into the library. The heavy shelves, lined with books, felt like witnesses to the conversation. The air still as Maria entered and folded her hands neatly in front of her. Lila sat on the sofa, her small legs tucked beneath her, her eyes darting from Adrian to Maria with the sharp alertness that had already saved him once. "I need your eyes," Adrian said simply. He had never been one for elaborate explanations with Maria. She preferred facts, and he respected her enough to give them. Maria studied his face for a moment, then turned her gaze to Lila, who seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of it. "It's about Miss Sophia, isn't it?" Maria said at last, her voice low and even. Adrian felt something twist in his chest. "What makes you say that?" "Because I've been watching her," Maria replied. "And because the child has been watching too. Sometimes it takes two sets of eyes to see clearly." Lila leaned forward then, her voice small but steady. "She goes into the garage when you're not home. She says she's just looking, but she touches things she shouldn't." Maria nodded, as if she had expected the words. "I've seen it too. She lingers where she doesn't belong. She asks questions no guest should ask, and she looks at your car as if it holds more than just an engine." Adrian's jaw tightened. Hearing it from Lila had unsettled him, but hearing Maria confirm it made the suspicion sink deeper. These were not coincidences, not childish fears. They were truths, collected by two people who had no reason to lie. For years, Maria had been ignored by the glamorous visitors who filled his house, overlooked like a piece of furniture, but in her quiet way, she had seen more than all of them. And now, with Lila beside her, Adrian realized he had two allies he could not afford to dismiss. Lila sat on the edge of the armchair, her knees pulled close to her chest, her voice so quiet that Adrian had to lean forward to catch each word. She did not speak quickly, she never did, but every sentence carried weight. She told him about the afternoons when Sophia slipped into the garage with a careless smile, saying she wanted to tidy up or check the trunk for shopping bags, but instead of cleaning she lingered, running her fingers along the seams of the car as if she were searching for something hidden. At first, Lila had thought nothing of it. Adults often did odd things that children were told not to question. But then she noticed the way Sophia's eyes shifted whenever Adrian's schedule kept him late at the office. She always knew when the house was empty enough for her to move freely. Adrian forced a laugh, one that did not quite reach his eyes. "She probably just likes the car. A lot of people do." But Lila did not waver. She went on, her small voice steady, as if she had been rehearsing the words in her head for days. She described the night she had seen Sophia near the study, whispering in low tones with Daniel Cross. Daniel had been Adrian's friend for more than a decade, his partner in the business from the first days of rented offices and borrowed equipment. He had stood beside him through failures and victories, and Adrian could not imagine him as anything but loyal. Yet Lila recalled the way Daniel's head bent towards Sophia, the way their voices dropped when she appeared in the hallway, and the way Sophia had quickly pretended she was simply asking about dinner reservations. At first, Adrian dismissed it with a wave of his hand. Daniel would never betray me, and Sophia knows better than to meddle in my work. You probably misunderstood what you saw. His words were firm, but they carried the sharp edge of a man trying to convince himself as much as the child in front of him. Lila lowered her eyes, but not before he caught the flicker of disappointment there, the silent judgment of someone too young to lie, and too experienced to believe comforting excuses. The sight of it unsettled him more than her story. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, but then the memories began to creep in. Small things, each one insignificant on its own, yet together forming a pattern he had ignored. Daniel's sudden need for private meetings that never resulted in clear reports, Sophia's unusual interest in his travel plans, the way she always seemed to know when he would be away. He had brushed those moments aside, too focused on deadlines and deals to see them for what they were. Now, listening to Lila, they returned with new clarity. The bug in his car was not an isolated act. It was part of something larger, and the people closest to him might not be who they seemed. He glanced at the child again, and the look in her eyes told him she already knew. The library was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock that had belonged to Adrian's father. Tall windows let in the fading light of evening, stretching long shadows across the shelves of books that lined the walls. Adrian sat in one of the leather chairs, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. Across from him, Lila perched on the edge of the sofa, her small legs swinging just above the carpet, her tablet clutched close to her chest. Maria Alvarez, steady as ever, occupied the chair beside her, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her sharp eyes fixed on Adrian, as if she were waiting for him to finally say the words he had been avoiding. For a long time, none of them spoke. The silence pressed down like weight, but it was Lila who broke it first. She spoke in her careful, deliberate way, describing again what she had seen: Sophia slipping into the garage, touching the car when she thought no one was looking, pretending to organize, but never actually moving anything. She mentioned the whispers with Daniel, how their voices fell when she entered, how Sophia's expression had shifted into that too. Bright smile adults used when they were caught somewhere they should not be. Maria nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving Adrian. I have noticed things too. Miss Sophia asks questions about your business she has no reason to know. She lingers in rooms when she thinks she is unseen. And Mr. Cross, he comes and goes with a freedom that even trusted men should not take for granted. It may mean nothing, but when you place it beside the bug in your car, she let the sentence trail off. But the implication was heavy. Adrian ran a hand across his jaw, trying to reconcile the people he thought he knew with the pieces of evidence stacking against them. Daniel had been by his side since the beginning, sharing the endless nights and near failures, the triumphs when deals finally broke in their favor. Sophia had been the woman who lit up every room, the one who had seemed to understand his need for control without demanding more than he could give. To imagine either of them as deceivers felt like tearing the foundation out from under his own life. But then he thought of the blinking red light beneath the console, the kind of detail he had overlooked but Lila had not. He thought of Maria's quiet observations, years of watching people glide in and out of this house, her ability to sense what others missed. He had spent his life trusting contracts and signatures, believing loyalty could be bought with money or forged through years of partnership. But perhaps he had been blind to the simplest truth. Sometimes the most dangerous betrayals came not from across the negotiating table, but from the hands you had already shaken. Lila's small voice carried across the room again. They think you don't see it, but I do, and Maria does too. Adrian met her eyes, then Maria's, and felt the cold certainty settle. For the first time he allowed himself to admit what had been forming at the edge of his thoughts. Loyalty, the kind he had depended on, might already have been broken, and the people he had let closest could be the very ones preparing to destroy him. Adrian chose his moment carefully. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that came after a long dinner when Maria had retreated to her room and Lila had disappeared upstairs with her books. Sophia sat on the sofa in the living room, a glass of red wine in her hand, her dark hair catching the glow of the lamp beside her. She looked like the picture of elegance, a woman painted into his life as if she had always belonged there. He lowered himself into the chair across from her, forcing his body to look relaxed even though tension coiled tight in his chest. "You're spending a lot of time in the garage lately," he said, his tone light, as if he were teasing, "taking a secret interest in engines I should know about." Sophia's laugh came quickly, smooth and practiced. "I like your car, Adrian. Is that a crime? It feels like a piece of you, and when I'm there, it feels like I'm close to you." She tilted her head, her eyes softening in a way that would have disarmed him months ago. He smiled faintly, playing along, though his mind was sharp behind the mask. "Close enough to look inside the trunk? Close enough to check the console?" Her laugh faltered just slightly before returning, brighter, stronger. "What are you talking about?" She leaned forward, setting her glass on the table, her expression painted with confusion. "Are you accusing me of something?" Adrian shrugged, feigning casualness. "It just seems you're very interested in that car, more than most people would be." The change came like a curtain falling. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling as she leaned closer. "I can't believe you'd even say that to me. After everything, after all the time we've spent together, you think I'm, what? Spying on you? Planting things in your car? Do you even hear yourself?" Her hands trembled as she lifted them, pressing against her chest as if the weight of his suspicion had broken something fragile. "I've given you nothing but love, Adrian. Nothing but myself. And this is what I get? Accusations?" Her performance was flawless. The tears slipped down her cheeks at the perfect pace. Her voice cracked at just the right moment, and her hurt looked so raw it reached through his logic and pulled at something deeper. For a fleeting second he felt doubt rise like water. Could Lila have been mistaken? Could Maria's observations be nothing more than coincidence stacked too neatly together? Sophia's anguish looked too real to be manufactured, and Adrian felt himself falter. At that moment, Lila appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. She stood still, her small face pale, her eyes locked on him. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. The hardness in her gaze said everything. She had trusted him to believe her, to see through the lies, and now he was hesitating. Sophia's sobs filled the room, but it was Lila's silence that cut deepest. Adrian looked at her and saw the disappointment in her eyes, sharp and cold, and it stung worse than any accusation. In that silence he realized that doubting her, even for a moment, was already a kind of betrayal. The house felt different after that night, though nothing had changed on the surface. Sophia still moved through the halls with her dazzling smiles, her perfume lingering in the air long after she had gone upstairs. Maria still worked with her quiet diligence, setting the table and closing the curtains as if the world outside could be kept at bay, with simple routine. Yet underneath, there was a new weight in the silence, and Adrian felt it most when he passed by Lila's door. She no longer came to sit in the living room during the evenings, no longer lingered by his office to ask quiet questions about the hum of machines or the flicker of lights. She retreated to her room instead, shutting herself away with her tablet. The door was never locked, but the message was clear all the same. She had withdrawn, and the stillness on the other side of the wall told him it was not the calm of comfort, but the quiet of disappointment. Adrian found her one night sitting cross-legged on her bed, the glow of the tablet reflecting on her small face. She did not look up when he entered. He paused in the doorway, struck by how young she appeared in that moment, her hair falling into her eyes, her small shoulders hunched forward. Yet there was something old in her posture, a tiredness that didn't belong to an 8-year-old. On the screen, he caught a glimpse of graphs, lines of signals, patterns he recognized as the same kind of scans his own team used to detect interference. She had been documenting, logging details he had not even asked her for. "Lila," he said softly, but her fingers kept moving, tapping the screen with deliberate care. "I get it," she said finally, her voice flat, not unkind but distant. "You don't believe me. You don't have to. Nobody ever does." The words hit harder than he expected. He wanted to argue, to insist that he did believe her, but the memory of Sophia's flawless tears and his own hesitation betrayed him. He had faltered, and she had seen it. No amount of explanations could erase the moment when his silence had told her that her truth was less important than what he wanted to believe. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to crowd her. "You've been keeping track of this?" he asked, nodding toward the tablet. She shrugged. "It helps me remember, helps me prove I'm not making things up." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were too sharp, too weary for someone her age. "In the other houses they told me I was lying even when I wasn't. So now I keep proof." Adrian felt the sting of her words, cut deeper than any accusation. He had promised himself he would be different, that he would give her stability. But in doubting her, even for a second, he had become just another adult who looked past her voice. The silence between them stretched, not comfortable, not easy, but heavy with things he could not yet repair. He realized then that trust was not built on what he gave her in gifts or comforts. It was built on moments like this, when her truth hung in the air, and all he had to do was choose to believe it. The library had become their quiet war room, its heavy curtains drawn against the world outside, the scent of old books and polished wood surrounding them, as if the room itself wanted to keep their secrets safe. Maria sat at the large oak table with her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, her fingers moving carefully across her laptop keys. The screen glowed with columns of numbers, long strings of transactions that looked harmless to anyone else, but meant something far more dangerous to her experienced eye. Adrian leaned over her shoulder, his jaw tight as she pointed to a set of figures highlighted in red. "These transfers were made under Daniel's name," Maria said, her voice calm but firm. "3 separate accounts, all routed through shell companies, all connected back to a competitor. They have been paying him for months." Adrian felt the words like a blade cutting through the last shred of denial he had been holding on to. Daniel had been with him from the beginning, through failures and victories, through nights when the company was nothing more than a dream, held together by ambition and exhaustion. To see his name tied to money that came from an enemy was more than betrayal. It was a theft of everything they had built together. On the other side of the table, Lila was hunched over her tablet, her small fingers moving with steady precision. The glow of the screen lit her face, giving her an intensity that reminded Adrian more of one of his cybersecurity analysts than a child. "I found something," she said softly, and the tone of her voice pulled both adults toward her. She turned the screen so they could see. A map of signals spread across it, lines connecting from the garage to distant points he did not recognize. She tapped one of the blinking icons. "This is the device in your car. I intercepted some of the transmissions it's been sending. They're encrypted, but I cracked part of the code. It's sending data files, not just recordings. Whoever planted it has been collecting everything you store in your car's systems, calls, schedules, routes, even voice commands." Adrian felt his throat tighten. The thought of strangers listening in on his private life, on business conversations worth billions, was bad enough. But to know they had siphoned off data as well meant it was not just curiosity, it was a deliberate, calculated attack. "Can you trace where it's going?" he asked. Lila nodded, though her expression stayed serious. "I traced 2 of the addresses back to servers used by Apex Pharmaceuticals. One more is hidden behind layers of rerouting, but I'll get through." She hesitated, then added, "It's too professional to be a mistake. They've been planning this for a long time." Maria closed her laptop, her voice steady as ever. "Between these transfers, and what the child has found. The truth is plain. Daniel is compromised. Sophia is not who she claims to be. And someone is trying to bring you down from the inside. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of undeniable evidence pressing in on them. Adrian looked from Maria's composed face to Lila's watchful eyes, and knew the balance of his life had shifted. This was no longer suspicion, no longer whispers of doubt. It was betrayal laid bare, and he could not turn away from it any longer. Adrian stood by the tall window of his library, the curtains half drawn, his reflection ghosting back at him in the glass. He had always believed betrayal came in the form of competitors, people across the table who wore ambition like armor. But now he knew it had come from the people closest to him. Maria's discovery of the transfers and Lila's interception of transmissions had torn away the last illusions. What sat before him was not just espionage, not simply the theft of ideas. It was something far more dangerous. This was destruction planned with precision, a trap built to collapse not only his company but his entire life. He turned back toward the table where Maria and Lila sat, the glow of their devices reflecting on their faces. Maria's expression was calm, though her eyes carried the gravity of what she had pieced together. Lila looked small in her chair, her tablet balanced on her knees, but her voice was steady as she explained what she had uncovered. They aren't just taking information, they're building a story around you. The files I intercepted mention accounts in your name that you don't own. They've been creating fake records, making it look like you've been moving money offshore for months. Adrian's chest tightened. Insider trading, he said quietly, the words tasting bitter. Lila nodded. And corporate theft. They've planted documents that look like you sold data to Apex. When the time is right, they'll leak it or hand it to the authorities. It will look like you betrayed your own company. Maria folded her hands in her lap, her voice sharp with certainty. Sophia and Daniel are not just greedy, they are ruthless. If this succeeds, you won't just lose the company, you'll be in prison. By the time you clear your name, if you ever can, Apex will have taken everything. The weight of it pressed on Adrian like a vice. He thought of the shareholders, of the people whose jobs depended on the company, of the years he had spent fighting to prove himself against older, richer men who had dismissed him as reckless. All of it could vanish in days if this plan unfolded. Worse than that, he realized, was how deeply they had woven it into his personal life. Sophia had been in his house, in his arms, pretending love, while planting the very evidence that would destroy him. Daniel, his closest ally, had been feeding his rival not just information, but his trust, twisting it into a weapon. For a moment he felt the urge to deny it, to cling to the comfort of believing this was all too elaborate. But the evidence was undeniable. Transfers, transmissions, documents, each piece alone, troubling, together devastating. He looked at Lila, who watched him with those sharp eyes, and felt the truth settle into place. They were not stealing pieces of his empire, they were building his downfall. Adrian straightened, his voice low but filled with steel. Then they think they're not just taking my company, they think they're taking me. Maria's eyes narrowed. Unless you stop them first. Adrian found Lila in her room again, curled up in the corner of her bed with her tablet pressed against her chest, as though it were the only shield she had. The curtains were drawn tight, shutting out the soft glow of the city, and the small lamp on her nightstand cast a pool of light that made her look even smaller, even younger. For a long moment he stood in the doorway, unsure how to begin. He had faced boardrooms full of skeptics, rivals who threatened lawsuits, journalists who tried to tear his reputation apart, but somehow this was harder. This was a child he had promised to protect, and instead, he had doubted her when she had needed him most. He walked into the room and sat at the edge of the bed, careful not to startle her. "Lila?" he said, his voice softer than it usually was, stripped of the sharpness he carried in business. "I owe you an apology." She kept her eyes down, her fingers tapping absently at the corner of her tablet. "You don't have to," she whispered. I'm used to it. Adults don't believe me. It's normal. Her words pierced him more than any accusation. He reached out but stopped short of touching her, afraid the gesture would feel empty if his words were not right. I wanted so badly to believe in Sophia, he admitted. I wanted her to be who she pretended to be. I ignored what you told me because the truth was harder than the lie. That was my mistake, not yours. For the first time she looked at him, her eyes wide and dark, holding the kind of hurt that came from too many disappointments. She studied his face as if searching for the truth inside his words. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she whispered, "Then believe me now." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. But in that silence, Adrian felt something shift inside him. He had built walls his whole life, walls of money, of charm, of control, and behind them he had hidden every fear and weakness. Sophia had slipped through those walls because he had wanted her to, because he had mistaken performance for love. But Lila was different. She wasn't asking for gifts or approval. She was asking only to be heard, only to be trusted. "I do," he said finally, and the words came with more weight than any promise he had ever signed. "I believe you, and I should have believed you from the beginning." Her expression softened, a flicker of relief passing over her face, though her shoulders stayed tense, as if she didn't quite dare to relax yet. He reached out then and touched her hand gently. "We'll fight this together," he said. "You, me, and Maria. No more secrets between us." Lila nodded slowly, the corners of her mouth lifting in the smallest of smiles. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was hope, and that was enough. For the first time in years, Adrian felt the walls around him begin to crack. Not in weakness, but in a way that let something stronger through. Adrian moved through the house with a calmness that was more performance than truth. Inside, his mind was alive with calculations, strategies shifting as quickly as the stock market on its worst day. He had played games of power before, but never one that reached into his home, never one that used love as a weapon and trust as bait. Now the stakes were higher than any business deal, and for once he wasn't playing alone. Lila and Maria were beside him. Unlikely allies, perhaps, but in their quiet strength, he felt something sharper than any boardroom advantage. The plan was simple in outline, though risky in execution. If Sophia and Daniel wanted secrets, then he would give them exactly what they were looking for. In the sleek Aston Martin that had been bugged, Adrian placed a series of carefully crafted files on the built-in system. They looked authentic, complete with dates, formulas, and confidential notations, but every piece was a fabrication. Buried within the false data was a trail designed to lead back to whoever tried to extract it. It was bait, polished and dangerous, and he placed it with the precision of a surgeon. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor of the garage as he worked, her tablet glowing in her lap. She had already mapped the transmissions of the bug, already shown him how it pulsed when it connected to its hidden receivers. Her small face was serious, her fingers tapping quickly as she set up her own trap within theirs. "When they send the files out, I'll see it," she explained, her voice steady. "I'll be able to trace where they go and who's pulling them." She looked up at him then, and for the first time in days her eyes held not just weariness, but determination. Maria, steady as stone, kept her place inside the house. She moved as she always did, polishing the silver in the dining room, dusting the tables in the hall, but her eyes followed every step Sophia took. She noted the times she lingered near the office, the way she paused before the garage door, the hushed phone calls taken in the garden where she thought no one could hear. Maria wrote everything down in neat, careful script. Her years of overlooked presence now turned into a weapon of quiet observation. As the evening stretched on, the house became a stage. Adrian sat at his desk with the appearance of a man working late, his laptop open to real reports while the decoys waited in the car. Lila monitored the bug's silent heartbeat, watching for the moment it would betray its master. Maria passed by the living room with folded laundry, her sharp eyes catching Sophia's reflection in the glass as she lingered by the garage door again. Her smile too casual, her movements too deliberate. The trap was set, and the three of them waited, bound together not by blood or history, but by the shared knowledge that betrayal had already crossed their threshold. Adrian felt a surge of something new as he looked at them, something he had not known he was missing. This was not just strategy, it was trust, hard, earned and undeniable, and he swore he would not waste it. The house was wrapped in silence, the kind that comes only after midnight, when the world has gone still and every sound carries more weight than it should. Adrian sat in the darkened library, with Maria and Lila beside him, their voices hushed, their movements deliberate. They had been waiting for this moment all day, the trap set and ready, but even with all his experience in careful planning, Adrian felt the pressure of it in his chest. The house did not feel like his anymore. It felt like a battleground. The faint sound of heels clicking against the marble floor reached them first. Sophia's steps were light, but not careless. She believed herself unseen, the picture of a woman simply moving through her own home. But to Adrian, every footfall sounded like a signal, like the tick of a clock, counting down to the inevitable. She drifted toward the garage with her usual grace, one hand brushing her hair back, her phone glowing briefly in her palm before she tucked it away. Maria gave the slightest nod, her sharp eyes narrowing as she adjusted her position by the door. Lila held her tablet tight against her chest, her breath quick but controlled. She whispered, almost to herself, "The signal's live now. She's waking it up." The glow from the device in her lap painted her small face in pale light, and Adrian felt a surge of pride at her calm. She was 8 years old, yet she had more focus than some of his most trusted employees. In the garage, Sophia moved to the car with practiced ease. She bent over the driver's side, her slim fingers working quickly as she slid a small device from her bag. To anyone else it might have looked like curiosity, a girlfriend peeking into the car of a man she loved. But Adrian knew better. He could see the precision in her gestures, the way she connected her tool to the console and began pulling data. On her screen, the decoy files he had planted lit up, their false secrets spilling out exactly as she had hoped. Adrian stepped out of the shadows then, his voice low but carrying. "Looking for something?" Sophia stiffened, her shoulders tightening before she turned with a gasp that sounded perfectly rehearsed. "Adrian, you scared me. I couldn't sleep and thought I'd check the car. You know how much I love it." Her smile was flawless, her tone soft, but Adrian had spent years watching lies unravel, and now he saw it. The two bright eyes, the careful control of her breathing, the delay before her words. For the first time, her mask slipped. Maria stepped forward, her presence steady and unyielding, while Lila's small figure appeared behind Adrian. Her eyes locked on Sophia with unflinching clarity. "You've been stealing from me," Adrian said, his voice even, controlled, sharper than the edge of glass. "And you thought I wouldn't notice?" Sophia's smile faltered, her mouth tightening before she spoke again, this time with a coldness that stripped away all pretense. "You have no idea what you're caught in, Adrian. This is bigger than you, bigger than any of us." Her voice had changed, her performance abandoned, and for the first time, the truth of who she really was seeped through. The woman he thought he loved had vanished, and in her place stood the spy who had betrayed him. The garage was heavy with silence after Sophia's words, a silence that seemed to stretch and bend until it pressed against the walls. Adrian stood across from her, his face set in stone, while Maria and Lila remained just behind him, their presence steady but tense. For weeks, Sophia had moved through his life with smiles and soft touches, her laughter echoing in the halls as if she belonged there. But the mask was gone now. Her beauty remained, but it had hardened into something sharp, her eyes flashing with the cruel calculation of someone who had never truly cared for anything but the game. "You think you're clever," she said, her voice stripped of warmth. "But you've been nothing more than a target since the day we met. Every moment you thought was real was a performance. Every touch, every smile, every kiss, all of it designed to make you blind. Her words were meant to cut, and for a moment Adrian felt the sting of them, but he did not falter. Behind him, Lila stood taller than her small frame allowed, her expression unshaken, and Maria's sharp gaze never left Sophia's face. Adrian drew strength from them both, from the knowledge that this time he had not been alone when the truth revealed itself. From the shadows beyond the doorway came the sound of movement, boots against polished floor, the unmistakable authority of men who had been waiting for their signal. Sophia's head snapped toward the sound, her composure flickering for the first time. Within seconds, the garage filled with federal agents, their jackets marked with the bold letters of the FBI. Red and blue lights flashed outside the wide windows as cars pulled into the driveway, the quiet night broken by the sudden presence of law. Sophia took a step back, her hand tightening around the small device she had been using to steal his data, but one of the agents was quicker. "Drop it," the man ordered, his voice sharp. She hesitated, her eyes darting to Adrian as if she could still twist her way out, but then the device clattered to the floor, her smile gone for good. Adrian said nothing as the agents moved in, reading her rights in a steady monotone. He simply watched as she was handcuffed, her eyes filled not with fear but with fury. Even then, even in defeat, she carried herself as though she had lost nothing, as though she believed another layer of the plan might still save her. But she was wrong. At that same hour, Daniel Cross was at company headquarters, moving through the office with the ease of a man who thought himself untouchable. He was preparing the final documents that would frame Adrian, carefully arranging the pieces of evidence that would have condemned his oldest friend. But he never finished. Agents stormed the building, their presence overwhelming, and Daniel was pulled from his desk in handcuffs. The look on his face, captured by security cameras, was one of shock that quickly crumbled into despair. News traveled fast in their world. By morning, the empire Sophia and Daniel had planned to steal had collapsed, their betrayal exposed in detail too thorough to deny. What had been built on deception fell apart in a single night, undone by the quiet observation of a child, and the loyalty of a woman who had been invisible to most. Adrian stood in the garage, long after the agents had taken Sophia away, the echo of her words lingering in the air. He turned to Lila and Maria, both silent, both steady, and felt a rare sense of clarity. Betrayal had tried to hollow out his life, but it had not succeeded, because in the end, he was not standing alone. The courtroom was colder than Lila expected, its walls tall and unfeeling, the air filled with the weight of whispers and the scrape of chairs. She sat on the witness stand with her legs dangling, her small shoes not quite touching the floor, but her voice carried with a steadiness that belonged to someone far older. She spoke of what she had seen, of Sophia in the garage, of the blinking light beneath the console, of the whispered conversations with Daniel when they thought no one was watching. Her words were simple, but the truth in them cut through every defense the lawyers tried to raise. The judge leaned forward, listening closely, and the jury watched her with respect rather than doubt. Adrian sat at the table, his hands clasped, his gaze fixed on her with a pride he did not bother to hide. When she finished, there was silence for a moment, a silence that felt like acknowledgement. She had been invisible in so many places before, unheard and overlooked, but here, her voice mattered. She stepped down and returned to her seat beside Maria, who reached out and held her hand with a quiet squeeze, the kind of gesture that told her she was no longer alone. That same day, Daniel Cross was sentenced. The man who had once been Adrian's closest ally, who had stood beside him through the early years of struggle, now stood shackled in front of the court, his face pale, his eyes hollow. The betrayal had cost him everything, and though Adrian felt no triumph, he felt a finality that allowed him to let go. Sophia, too, faced her fate, her cold mask finally stripped away by undeniable evidence. The empire they had tried to steal was gone, crumbled beneath the weight of their own greed. Outside the courthouse, Adrian held a different set of papers, ones far more important than legal victories or financial statements. Lila's adoption was finalized, her name now written beside his as family. He looked at her as they walked down the courthouse steps together, the cameras flashing, the reporters shouting questions, but for once, the noise did not matter. She was his daughter now, not by chance or obligation, but by choice. That evening at home, the house felt lighter, the air different, no longer carrying the shadows of secrets. The surveillance devices were gone, the hidden betrayals torn out by their roots. The library, once their war room, had been opened again, its windows wide to the evening sun. Adrian gathered Lila and Maria in the living room and handed the girl a small wrapped box. Her eyes widened as she tore the paper away to reveal a device shaped like a phone but brighter, softer in design. "It's a security scanner," Adrian explained, his voice warm. "But it's made for you, easy to use, safe, and built with the same ideas you showed me. For the girl who saw what I couldn't." Lila's eyes filled, though she blinked quickly, as if afraid the tears might blur the moment. She held the device as though it were more valuable than any treasure, not because of what it could do, but because it meant she was seen, her mind and her instincts honored. Maria smiled gently, her hands folded in her lap, her presence steady as always. The three of them sat together, not as survivors of betrayal, but as something stronger. They had been tested, and what remained was not loss, but family. If this story moved you like it moved us, don't forget to give it a like. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. We'd love to have you with us.